The Outlanders Journey. Tier 1, Level 1. Chapter 8. Laurel. You're barely hanging on. You've been crawling on all fours for the last several hours, your mouth parched. Your empty stomach is churning only acid. You watch as the clouds overhead form looming shadows, crackling with flashes of lightning. The air is muggy, your skin's sticky. All you want is to pass out so you don't have to think about how famished you are. You learn that these individuals are orcs, a race of people you've mainly heard of through elvish fables. Most of them speak in a different language, but a few have taken the initiative to introduce themselves to you in Sylvan. The woman that invited you to join them is Dura, and she acts as the de facto leader of a small hunting party. Her self-appointed second-in-command, an ambitious, loud, and reckless younger cousin of hers, is Uzul, and he was the first to speak up. The youngest of the bunch, the one with the wolf, is a boy of 13 years named Mach. According to Bach, his pet wolf is of a much larger breed of canine known as dire wolves. The one here is, rather amusingly, named Rock. Mach, Rock, Bach, says Bach, pointing at each individual in succession. A tiny smile forms on Mach's face before he forces it back down. In his embarrassment, he dashes ahead of the group, tailing only Rock, who's leading the pack. The wolf's nose is pressed to the ground, sniffing loudly. The rest of you follow closely behind. Every few minutes or so, Mach glances over his shoulder at Maya-Lee. Maya-Lee has been gripping your wrist so tightly that you've lost all feeling in your fingers. "He keeps looking at me," she whispers. "I've noticed," you say. You're not sure if he's seen past Maya-Lee's disguise. "What's wrong with him?" she asks. "I'm not sure," you say. You shift forward a bit, blocking his view of Maya-Lee. When he turns his head again, you glare at him, and he immediately averts his gaze. More hours pass, and you've fully dissociated. You're leaning into Bach, barely able to even drag your feet. Your hands and nails are blackened with dirt. Tiny pebbles have embedded themselves into your palms and knees. Ahead, Rock suddenly stops. He digs his nose into the loose dirt. Then he lifts his head, sniffs the air, and howls. A few seconds later, you hear another howl in response, not too far ahead. Mach points toward the sound, and all the hunters rise to their feet, scampering forward. The distant howling continues for several seconds, as if guiding you to it. Rock's tail is wagging uncontrollably, and he takes off, breaking free of Mach's hold. Soon, you spot this second direwolf, its ears poking just above the grasses. It lifts its head up and then charges at Rock. Only as it nears you do you realize how much more massive it is compared to Rock, who is already a large wolf in your eyes. This new wolf's legs are nearly a foot longer. It towers over Rock, who instinctively lowers himself to the ground, his tail still swinging. This new direwolf stands majestically, sporting a well-groomed and pure white coat, puffing out its chest. In comparison, Rock is riddled with patches of ripped black fur, discolored and mangled in some places. The second direwolf sits silently as it waits for everyone to catch up. Rock is sniffing at the second direwolf. He paws at the ground and lets out huffed barks, as if seeking attention, but he is fully ignored. Mach runs up to Rock and grabs at his fur again, whispering to him in much the same way that Bach speaks with animals. The second direwolf stares into Mach's eyes and snorts. It stands and turns around, trotting ahead. Mach motions at all of you to follow it. You look over your shoulder, noting the now faint outline of the forest behind you. You've strayed much further than you'd hoped. The orcs live so far away from the INA border. Everyone stops again, and you nearly crash into the orc in front of you. You scan the area, nothing notable here except for a single large boulder. For miles upon miles the view has been the same, with the exception of a single tree here or a small bush or rock there. The second direwolf howls again. The seemingly unremarkable boulder suddenly moves, rocking back and forth before rolling away to the side, revealing an entrance down a dark tunnel. Stepping out, a tall, muscular orc man dusts his hands. He peers around before turning his focus to the hunting party. There is a deep scar across the side of his neck, as well as a discolored wound on his arm peeking through his hide armor. The white direwolf scampers next to him, nuzzling its head against his hand. He scratches behind the ears before slapping it forcefully on the side of the belly. Dura gently nudges her way to the front. She runs up to him and hugs him, her hand on his chest. He holds her by the waist as she leans in and whispers into his ear. As she speaks, she points at you, and the man glances at you. You feel Maya Lee cower underneath you. The man lets go of Dura and approaches you. You take a deep breath, bracing. You told Bach that if something goes wrong, the three of you would run, but you have no more energy to get away or fight. Bach, sensing the tension, positions himself in front of you and Maya Lee. But instead of coming to you, the man leans down in front of Mach, who has, by this point, hidden behind rock, crouching down, hands covering his head. Mach is visibly scrawnier than the other orcs. The man shoves Rock aside and squats down. He takes Mach by the chin, tilting it up and forcing eye contact. Then he lets out a disappointed sigh. He hugs Mach and speaks in a very low and stern voice. You have no idea what they're saying, but you can tell by Mach's whining tone that it's not all that different from how you sound when you argue with your parents. Mach pounds his fist against the ground and points at Rock as he continues to protest. Rock, meanwhile, has flattened his entire body like a guilty dog trying to submit to his owner. He's whimpering softly. The man waves his hands dismissively and stands back up. He turns to you, and he finally speaks. My little brother's mischief has caused you trouble. He's fluent in Sylvan, his voice deep, resonant, and elegant. You and Bach glance at each other. No, it's not a problem, you say. The man shakes his head. He grabs Mach by the elbow, lifting him to his feet. The man shoves Mach toward you, causing the boy to stumble, and barks a terse command. Mach, avoiding eye contact, fidgeting with the edge of his clothes, mumbles under his breath. Sorry I attacked you. His voice is barely audible. The man shouts another command. This time, Mach shouts at the top of his lungs, Sorry I attacked you. He spins around and sprints into the tunnel. Rock takes this opportunity to get away as well, barking as he chases after Mach. The man pinches the bridge of his nose, shaking his head. He sighs. I apologize on behalf of my foolish brother. It's really no problem, you say. You are furbolgs, and so you are our friends, says the man. My name is Urnog. Nice to meet you, Urnog, you say. I am Baron. This is my brother, Bach, and my sister, Bella. Urnog nods at each of you individually. You may come inside with us to stay safe from the storm. He gestures toward the tunnel. The hunters have begun to funnel inside, dipping their heads below the low opening and disappearing into the darkness. A crack of lightning flashes, followed closely by booming thunder. The air feels almost too dense to breathe. You glance at Bach, who appears reluctant, but he nods. Maya Lee stares into the dark entrance, and you realize you're making the two of them go into some mysterious and most likely confined space. You pat her head. It's okay, you say, telepathically. Come, says Urnog. It'll be warm inside. We're about to eat, too. Are they going to eat us? Maya Lee whispers. You run your fingers through her hair. Thank you, you say to Urnog. I apologize. My sister's a bit shy. She's scared of the dark. There's light inside, says Urnog. You'll see. Come on, you say, putting your arm around Maya Lee and nudging her along. She resists for a moment before relenting. Holding hands, the three of you inch down, ducking your heads. Sure enough, there's a dim light at the bottom, and the lower you go, the more spacious the tunnel becomes. There's smoke rising up to the top, and you smell an enticing, savory aroma. You also hear clattering and clinking, and muffled chattering. You enter the main cave, and the warmth of the interior instantly hits you. There are lit torchlights along the walls of a massive cavern, and the ground has been covered by a soft bedding of dried grasses and leaves. The hunters a few feet ahead of you proudly display the newly killed deer, lifting it up over their heads, and, although quietly, you can sense the almost joyful relief of all the people inside. The animal is carried away to a corner, where you see knives being sharpened. The interior is a strange blend of recognizable items from New Everlon, as well as tools, weapons, and pottery crafted out of clay and wood. You find it amusing to see how many New Everlon items have been refashioned for alternative purposes. Wooden shields turned into cutting boards, breastplate armor bent flat into large serving trays, leather armor turned to sleeping mats. There are clear symbols of the Blue Lion Army engraved on the weapons and shields here, but no one seems to pay it any mind. You count about 80 individuals here in total. A few have lifted their heads up, observing you with curiosity, but most are all busy taking care of their own chores and duties, cleaning, preparing ingredients, tending to the sick, counting inventory. Behind you, Dura puts her hands on your shoulder. She waves, and everyone turns to her. She announces something at them, and they nod, with a few smiling at you. Bach waves sheepishly at them. Dura gestures for you to sit in a circle around a large cauldron. An elderly woman is slowly stirring, her arms muscular and sturdy. "I tell them you are guests," says Dura. "I say you help us hunt. I tell them you run from the evil elf that steal you." It's still unclear why they are showing so much hospitality to you. "Thank you," you say. "You are too kind to us." The three of you sit across from the elderly woman, who is yet to even glance up. "Elder Lasha take care of you," says Dora. You nod. "Thank you." She nods as well before turning around and heading over to the deer, which is now being skinned and dismembered. Bach and Maëlie stare hungrily at the boiling stew, which is heated over some sort of charcoal fire. Under the torchlight, the broth has an almost golden hue. There are floating chunks of maize and beans, as well as some sort of starchy yellow vegetable that you don't recognize. It smells rich and creamy. The old woman, what was her name again, has yet to even look at you. Her face is peppered with liver spots, and her eyes seem partially closed. One of her tusks is missing. You say, clearing your throat. "Thank you again for your hospitality. I hope we aren't intruding too much." A smile forms on her face as she stirs steadily. "I've seen a furbolg once in my youth," she says in fluent Sylvan. She speaks slowly and deliberately. "She came to me when I was dying of thirst. I was so parched that I could no longer stand, and when she arrived, I thought I was in the midst of a divine guardian, sent by Grumpsh himself. She had me drink milk out of her hand, and I fell asleep in her arms. She carried me back to my home, and she left before I even awoke. Finally, she lifts her head up to you. I thought I would never see another furbolg again, and now 3 beautiful young furbolgs show up out of nowhere. For each of you, she pours a steaming bowl of stew and garnishes the top with crushed, toasted seeds. Eat." Your clay bowl is slightly chipped at the edges, but it warms your shaky hands. You tip the bowl to your mouth. The soup nearly burns your tongue, but you are awash with savory sweetness, which seems to instantly rejuvenate you. The soft texture of the corn and beans falls apart in your mouth. You chew the starchy plant, which has a bit more structure than a potato. The crushed seeds taste like sunflower seeds. It's so exquisite you could cry right now. Maëlie is pouring the entire stew into her mouth as if the heat doesn't scald her at all. She finishes, licking her lips clean and burping loudly. "Slow down," you say, patting her back. "You are welcome to have more if you'd like," says the old woman, scooping another ladle into Maëlie's bowl. "Thank you," says Bach, also eating more ravenously than you're used to seeing. You continue to sip on the soup, blowing away the hot steam. The woman watches you patiently. "Eat," she urges you. "I can't thank you all enough," you say. "We haven't eaten in days." "Then stop talking to me and eat more." She reaches over and drops another ladle into your half-drunken bowl. The steam wafts up to your face. Your entire body has eased up, and you can tell that neither Bach nor Miley is particularly worried about their safety here anymore, despite being in an enclosed space. Funny what a hot meal can do. "What is your name again?" asks Bach. "You may call me Lasha," says the woman. "Thank you, Lasha," you say. "Truly, we are indebted to you all. We haven't been shown such kindness in so long. Your people have raised and herded the very bison that sustain us. If anything, we owe you a great debt for nourishing us for generations." You shake your head. "It wasn't your responsibility to help us, and yet you all went out of your way to bring us here." "No, child," says Lasha. "There is no greater sin than to knowingly starve another living being. Hunger, deprivation, to allow it to fester is the most wicked of all." She bangs her ladle against the pot. "Mock!" she suddenly shouts, pointing her finger. "What do you think you're doing? I see you." You hear a soft yelp from behind you. You look back to find Mock crouching down as if he's been sneaking up on you. He scampers up to Miley and drops something down. He kicks it towards her before running away to where Rock and the other direwolf are gnawing on animal carcasses. Lasha sighs and shakes her head. "What are we to do with him?" You pick up a tiny, unlit candle rolling on the floor behind Miley. Most of it has already been burned. At the bottom, you find the familiar engraving of a lion's head. You hand it to Miley. "I think he's gifting it to you." She takes the candle, touching her finger to the wick, scowling. "Why?" You both turn to see Mock hiding behind Rock. He pokes his head up before ducking down again. "Shoo him away," says Lasha, "and he'll know better than to bother you." Without asking, she swipes the empty bowl out of Bach's hands and fills it to the brim again. "Eat," she says to him. "You're tiny." Bach sits up from his typical slouched posture, and you can't help but snicker. "You too," says Lasha, pointing her dripping ladle at you. "Stop smirking at your brother and eat. You're nothing but skin and bones, nothing like a furbolg. You would have normally been devoured alive by now." Bach snorts and turns away from you. "The curse of the winter looms further south every year. Now eat." She reaches out to her right and grabs more coals out of a bucket, fanning the smoke. A small breeze rushes in, and you notice what appears to be another opening on the opposite side of the cave, draped over with curtains made of animal hide. The cavern seems to be a part of a larger cave system. You hear the sound of flowing water behind the curtains. "I was wondering," you say, "is this your permanent home? This is where you live?" Lasha shakes her head. "We would normally never think to live in a cave." "Then you're here because of the weather?" you say. "The storm that's coming in tonight?" She stares at you, her eyes weary and pale. "The elves," she says. "They've taken our home. We have no place to stay for the winter." "Oh, do you mean the town of Ellie?" "That's not what we call this land." She lifts the pot off the coals and sets it aside. She begins to prepare a makeshift rack, presumably for the deer. "Before the elves arrived, we had already known that our way of life was changing. The Arakokra, with whom we had traded for generations, no longer answered our calls. We realized they had found new people, better people to form their alliances with. We were no longer acknowledged, and they left us to our own devices, in spite of our former agreements. The winters have grown harsher with every passing year. The animals we hunt are moving farther and farther south, and fewer come back each spring. Their movements grow more unpredictable. The unseen lake, our only haven, has now been taken over by the elves. They claim ownership of Grumsh's territory with no basis, but they bring with them strange magics to enforce their own laws. With our weapons, we can only fight them one at a time, but with their destructive witchcraft, they can kill dozens of us at once. They burn us, electrify us, infect us with incurable sickness. And so, we are left here, with nowhere else to go." "You are hiding here for the winter?" asks Bach. Thunder booms and rattles the ceiling, and everyone halts for a moment. The rain has begun. We cannot stay for too long, says Lasha. This place is only temporary. We are at risk of floods, and we don't know how sturdy the cavern walls are. Is there really nowhere else to go? You ask. She shakes her head. We have tried sending scouts. My grandson, Yacha, returned 2 days ago. She points across the cave at an area where several sick and wounded orcs are lying to rest. So you're currently living in hiding then? You ask. This is only a temporary location. If the elves find us, it will be the end of us all. Ernog, carrying the skinned deer over his shoulder, motions with his head for all of you to step aside. He and another orc carefully place the meat on Lasha's makeshift racks, ribs, shoulder, each of its severed limbs. Before long, you can smell the animal fat rendering as the smoke rises. You glance over at Bach, who stares with a horrified expression. Ernog nods politely at you before heading over to the wolves, throwing some more meaty carcasses at them. He wipes his hands and ruffles Mock's hair, who gazes admirably at his brother, and then begins to patrol the cave. He is still a child to me, says Lasha. He is still new to being the leader. Who? Ernog? Asks Bach. Lasha nods. I was around before even his grandfather was born. I was the one who appointed his father, and then him after that. How long has Ernog been the leader? You ask. 40 days. You nearly choke on the stew. Sorry, did you say 40 days? You say. I did. Your jaw drops. Ernog commands the room with merely his presence. No one would believe he's only been the leader for 40 days. Mock and Ernog lost their father not long ago. Poor things, having to take on such a burden under such circumstances. You look over at Mock, who's trying to wrestle the meat out of Rock's jaws in a game of tug-of-war. How old is Ernog? Asks Bach. 20. He's only 1 year older than me, you say. You are all children forced into such a savage world, says Lasha. At the very least, Ernog is still among his own kind, but you three are all alone. Maya-Lee nods, speaking up for the first time. She says, We want to go home. You poor things, she says. Home is so far away. We hope to reach before winter, you say. Then we shall help you find home. Really? Says Bach. Lasha nods. The conversation is interrupted as Dura waves her arms again. Slowly, the orcs gather in a circle around the pot of stew, bowls in hand as they wait eagerly. Lasha steps aside and pulls you and Maya-Lee to your feet. Get out of the area before they get too rowdy. She hands the ladle to the first person next to her, and soon all of them are piling around the pot, filling their bowls. You'll really help us? Says Maya-Lee. Yes, and you are welcome to stay with us as long as you need, says Lasha. Thank you, you say. Thank you for your offer to help. You know, however, that you can't accept. You look down at Maya-Lee, who appears lively and almost happy for the first time in weeks, but she also presents a risk to you all. You know her disguise won't hold up to close scrutiny, and you don't know how they'll react to her identity as an elf. She's too unpredictable. One bad casting of a spell, and her wild magic will set off again. You must leave soon. In the distance, Ernog and Dura are still waiting for the rest to eat, watching quietly, his arm draped over her shoulder. He manages an entire tribe, making sure everyone is alive and fed, and he's doing much better than you with only 2 other people. You wonder when is the best time for you to leave, and once you do, how many days it will be before your next hot meal again.